Well, welcome back to another episode of Successfully Unsuccessful Podcast. I'm your host, Josh Dietrich, and today, here in the house physically, is Mr. Dave Barton. How are you, brother?
Hey, I'm doing really good. Thank you for the invite.
Dude, of course. I think I've known this guy for a minute. How many bike rides have we been on? Maybe we've been on 3 because that's as long as I've been
I was
at
gonna say
Westbridge.
3. Yeah,
Yeah.
three would have been my guess. Yeah.
And I think through that sort of getting used to what that might look like through the process of church and men's coffee, got to know this guy has a monstrous heart for serving men around him, and that maybe that's a newer found way of expressing how the Lord's working through you, which we'll dive into in a minute. But just scratching the surface probably even then at some point. But now just really cool to see how God's working through you, how he's using you. You've been a corporate guy for almost 20 years plus, more?
Yeah, 20 years plus.
20 years plus.
Yeah.
And we'll leave that to you to disclose what that looks like. But what I found, Dave, is and I've shared with you that the sentiment from my world in entrepreneurship, and there was a season where I was a corporate guy, but for you, you're in the thick of the corporate world and you've seen lots of change more recently. And so what I've loved to appreciate you is certainly the big picture that comes with a corporate America and the roles you've had and the people you've led and what you've built. Massive appreciation for that. And the same token, I've seen you share and express a newfound appreciation for entrepreneurship. So what I love is, Dave, core council member, your perspective of life, of raising boys successfully, but also bringing that what really good looks like into the core council environment. So welcome. Why don't you just quickly say who your family is, share with us what you do for work, and maybe just briefly tease us with what God's doing in your life right now.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, a lot of questions there. Well, like I said, thank you for the invitation, Josh, and getting to know you and to see what you have going on with how God's working in your life is it's truly one of the gifts that the Lord provides when you serve others. You see that growth in others. So I very much see that in you, brother, and appreciate that. So as Josh mentioned, I'm Dave Barton. I am a husband, a father. So I am husband to Michelle. We have been married over 26 years.
Dang.
And I know when you say it out loud and when you say that I've been in corporate America for 20 plus years, it makes me seem old or feel old.
Or is it the beard and the grays? Because I have the bald head too. I just hide it. Yeah.
Yeah. No, I no, as we may get into, no fig leaves here. Follically challenged, or however you want to say it. But no, and father to my oldest son, Carter, who's 24, and my youngest son, Trevor, who's 20. So I am also I guess, a senior parent. No more teenagers in the house. So I've progressed upon that. As you mentioned, I've worked over 20 plus years in the corporate space across banking, finance, retail, and then for the last 17 years in healthcare, specifically dealing with financial analytics. Mm-hmm. So analytics came on, I would say, midway through my healthcare career. As I start working with big data, and I always laugh within the space. You'll see people who say I have 20, 25 years in data science, and I laugh because before 2013, there really wasn't data science. Yeah. Computing speed, the tools that we use, the technology, the coding, coming into the corporate realm really wasn't a thing.
So you're really an old dog.
Yeah, I've seen all that. I haven't been around enough. I've heard stories where they used to kind of roll the computer around with the punch cards, I think, to program. I'm not that old.
Yeah.
But
that's not quite.
But I know people who did that. So
nice.
Kind of ran in that sweet spot. Outside of analytics, I think you alluded a little bit, Josh. And I hope something that people hear in my story today is that it is never too late to embrace and to learn and to come into experience with what the Lord has for you in life. You mentioned volunteer and service. Really got into that in towards the end of 2019 as our church built a permanent facility, but really kind of through the COVID years of 2020 through 2023, got serving with our church, with our men's coffee group, which is a huge passion of mine. Again, as I've seen your growth as a brother in Christ, really getting to hear those stories on a weekly basis. So we meet Tuesday mornings. We always say Tuesday morning, 6:30, we'll be there if you need to re-jump or restart your week if Monday didn't go so well. And just having that growing group of men in ministry, sharing each other's stories and revealing what God has to work in their lives has been a great passion. Outside of the corporate space, as I mentioned, things can change extremely quick if you run with the Lord and you start to see His blueprint for you in life. Over the last year, I've also become an adjunct professor with Grand Canyon University, so where I got my master's degree. It was such a great experience and such great people. I said, if I ever have the opportunity to go back and to pay that forward, I would. Cool. And so that presented itself. That's been a blast, and it's cool to also go into a space that often gets criticized, public education, and feel like you can make a difference in that space and pour value into those students and kind of give them, all those, if I have any wisdom or years of experience, share what those experiences look like that they're heading towards, so that they're going towards it with eyes wide open, and they're always also looking to shape their education in a way that will make them marketable. So that's been good. And then I guess just an aside, which was a similarity that we have, moved into the space of content creator with the Stronghold podcast, which I believe I'll launch episode 8 will drop tomorrow morning. That also drops on Tuesday mornings. And I think that is probably all I need to detail out, but it's a lot.
Yeah.
But one thing we mentioned, and not to go too off the rails, is just the opportunity to, once the Lord points you in a direction, once He kind of shows you the blueprint of what you are capable of, and you start believing the value that He would have for you, that He is in your heart, that He can guide you. I mentioned to Josh previously, and just to share with the listeners, I really went on almost an endeavor to see where my outer boundaries were from a capability standpoint and a time management standpoint, and using the skill set that the Lord has blessed me with. And I've been joking with a few people recently. I would say that's been intentionally going after that since beginning of August. So about 3 months into that, I'm starting to find the boundaries, and I will need to scale back a little bit. But it's amazing to do that. And the idea that I got for that was just from a physical standpoint. Pursuing just health and exercise and capability within that, I started to see that I was capable of so much more than I had previously ever thought of undertaking or ever thought that I could do at a later age. And I said, I think that, I certainly believe that the mind, body, and soul is intrinsically connected, kind of that three-legged stool analogy. So I said, okay, well, the mind's part of that. Let me see if I can challenge that part of me too, and explore the capability and see what my boundaries are and grow within that space. And it's been extremely rewarding, and it's mimicked that physical capability.
Yeah.
So,
well, it's cool when you start to really point out a few of those different things. I did a similar thing. 2023 was big for me, sort of like starting to set real goals across 6 major disciplines in my life. And the word discipline, I guess, no pun intended, because I felt like there was a way that I was approaching life that wasn't very disciplined when it came to, physical, mental, emotional health, right? Like financial health was me chasing after success. And for me, that meant working really hard at someday, having the opportunity to maybe make enough money to have a choice to pursue something I really loved. And that was what I was after. Now I put a lot of other things aside. Relational health suffered, and some of my story I share many times, but like, it's interesting because full circle was like, to pursue what I believe God has really asked me to do, I needed to steward kind of everything about what He gave me. And something about what you described here is mind, body, soul connection and really pushing the limits. We get so comfortable in America. Like, we can be fat and happy and mostly just fat. And happy is a word that I believe is very fleeting. Because happiness is really dependent on a level of emotion as opposed to a joy that's an overflowing of what I believe is the Lord working in you, right? Is what I would call the proper definition of joy. And I actually heard someone call it as the the flag you put up in the castle when the king is home.
Right.
Like it's just the white flag. I surrender. I'm good. But as I'm learning and hearing from you, like pursuing this physical ability, like your body is transformed. You're stronger, significantly more lean. You're more capable of running and enduring pain for longer. You're training yourself there. Not only that, you've trained yourself in a way to push the limits by, I have a full-time job and I'm doing all these other things because I don't want to waste the time that God's given me. That's right. And like, so similarly, we've joined forces and not on purpose, but just more like this exploration. And I'm curious because, I feel like we all have little stories and these little veins and these little, inlets of where we're exposed to certain things. But some of these little cricks, they grow to turn into small rivers over time and eventually then fuel to the Mississippi, right? The big kahuna.
Right.
But for you, what are some of the milestones? Because I think at 49 years young, did I get that right?
48.
48.
Yeah.
I'm anticipating you're going to live, a little bit longer.
Yeah.
At a minimum. This reality is to work, to eventually save enough money, to eventually retire, to eventually enjoy life, when then our body is frail. It just never sat with me.
Right.
And so the pursuit of like financial freedom was there. But for you to start thinking about expanding all the things that God had for you, what are some of the really specific things? Because I think at 44, at 40, at 49, at 40, it doesn't matter, 30 some, we're now stewards of all he gave us. Yeah. What happened to you for you to go, I want to take this to a new level?
Yeah, I think that I can back up because if they're all related from a mind, body, and soul standpoint, then I guess let me back way up. From a professional standpoint, I've mentioned, husband over 26 years. And when my wife and I got married, one thing that we always knew would be a priority would be family. Mm-hmm. And not only our relationship, but our role as parents. Mm-hmm. And where that came from was personally, I was a child of divorce, a divorced family, and Ashley, I really want to pick back up on that from something from the Wild Heart, at Heart mm-hmm. experience, which yes, thankfully yes. to you I came across, and so I would love to talk about that today. But a child of divorce, and just really no good illustrations of marriage from my background, and then my wife. She lost her father, and she lost her older brother, and she came from a position of loss and not by any means an ideal family setting. And so what made us a couple, what we really bonded upon was, I think that we valued each other, that we provided each other affirmation, that we provided each other unconditional love, and I think that to one extent or another, through various experiences, we hadn't had that displayed to us. And so we bonded from that, and that's a way that we formed our family. As I mentioned, it's 26 plus years strong now at this point, with a 24 and a 20-year-old. And I bring that up because that seeped into my professional career. Mm-hmm. I remember we graduated from Minnesota State Mankato and started looking for a career. And I'll date myself a little bit. There was really no online job searching at the time. I actually don't really remember how I found out there was jobs at Wells Fargo, where I started my professional career when everybody and their brother was refinancing their homes. But I got in front of them. I interviewed, and at the first interview, they mentioned that I'd be making $26,000 a year. And I just remember getting home and telling my wife, if I get this, I'm going to be making $26,000 a year, and thinking that was like the greatest thing ever.
That's it. You achieved it. You made it.
Yeah. So that maybe at least paints the time frame of when that was from.
I'm guessing 1998.
Around there.
Okay.
Yeah.
I was doing rough math.
Just a couple of years later. Okay. Yeah. Just a couple of years later. So, but even then, once my son was born, which he was before that experience, we were still students at Minnesota State. Okay. When my oldest son Carter was born, that was priority. And when we were in the hospital, and I was giving him his first bath under the sink as Michelle was recovering from giving birth. The Lord, even then, I would say my relationship with the Lord was connected. I wouldn't say strong. He spoke to me. He said, you're a father now. This is your mission. This is what I have for you. I would come to realize later, it was not what I had, but the Lord was giving me that mission to carry that forward and to kind of break that cycle and to be the father that he called me to be. And so in a professional setting, I was going to make the job work to facilitate my family, not make my family work so I could facilitate my career. Right. I've known that very early on, and kept that progression going. And so fast forwarding a little bit, as my oldest son was going into his senior year, things were going pretty good. My wife and I mutually kept a focus on parenting. I progressed in a career. I stayed employed. I moved around a little bit, but we always kept the priority on family. In 2018, as I mentioned, as my son was heading into his senior year of high school, we were sitting out at a triathlon, and both my sons are swimmers. So, great builds, hard workers. There's no faking a swim practice.
No.
Like if you stop moving,
it's kind of like wrestling in a way, but for
someone's got to hold you or you drown.
Yeah.
There's really no faking either one of those disciplines. So very hard workers. He's just chiseled, and I'm sitting on this beach with him, and this kind of plays into where I'm at now and where I'm at today. And you mentioned discipline, and I'll kind of cap it off with that. Is that we were sitting on the beach. He's getting ready to compete in this triathlon. We see all shapes, sizes, ages running by us, ready to do this triathlon. And something hit me like a ton of bricks. I asked myself, could I do this triathlon today? And the answer was, I don't think so.
Was it a heck no?
It was a heck no.
Yeah.
It was a steep realization of diminished skills. And I had been an athlete. I had been an athlete in high school and to start my college career. But at that time I was not. That was all in the past. But the pertinent thing to that story, Josh, is that we had to focus. I had to focus to be a strong father, a strong husband. The primary way I was doing that with my sons, that was unacceptable. And again, I just fast forwarded from birth to going into a senior year in high school.
Right, 18-ish.
So this is not a story of perfection by any means. It is a story of grace. And so I'll get past that. But I realized that I was being a father that was all words and no action with my boys. And that was carrying on in my career. That was carrying on in friendships. I would talk a lot. I would let people know what they should do. I would let my sons know that you should go to practice more often, or maybe you should go lift weights, or maybe you should go do this. But when they saw, you often hear as a parent too, that your kids will do what they see you doing, not what you tell them to do. And so it was all playing into that. I had a good relationship with both my sons, but I felt this deep dissatisfaction sometimes with the way that they would apply themselves in life or strive towards things because I saw that was a little deficient. And what I saw was myself.
Yeah. Dude, it's so powerful. And a few different things kind of stand out to me. One is the whole idea of practicing what you preach, right? And we can talk about where that comes from, the idea of poser, right? And sometimes we have just this idea of what it is to be or to become, or who we want to represent ourselves as. And sometimes we don't fit or match up to the mark. And it's often just because we know there's work to be required, and putting in that work requires a whole new set of discipline and standardization. But it's a lot easier to talk. And you were talking and walking the talk in some ways, but in these other areas, right? And so it's interesting how you start shaping these pieces together. And we often find that there's this trade-off, right? In one particular or two or three particular areas where we might think in our mind, we're just doing enough and that's totally fine. And I think we know, and after being on the other side of it, that God has called us to be all we're capable of. And often it's uncomfortable. In fact, that means to do hard things.
Yeah.
And so, and I know you've done now a try and a full, have you done an Ironman yet?
No Ironman. I have to become significantly better at swimming before that's possible. Everything else is fine. But
you have now accomplished that one, overcome that one thought that goes back to when you saw your son. You've now done the try, right?
Right.
Yeah. And so that's pretty cool, because there's this tipping point where you probably analyzed your own words and said, man, and this just kind of reminds me of me, where it's like, how can I ask and how can I be to these people, but I'm not myself, right? I'm not doing these things.
Yeah.
I want to achieve that. I'm going to put in the work. And so you did in other areas, right? And so I feel like it's so easy in different ways because we get comfortable. So that was great. That was one thought that came to mind, how that was very aligned with my experience in different ways. But the whole concept back to nurture and nature, right? Inside our DNA, we might not even be that way, but because of how we were raised and the fear of loss, or the fear or the want, the desire to be loved, pushed us towards this close bond, which is an amazing thing. That maybe despite all circumstances, we chose comfort in some ways as opposed to pain. And we can separately talk about prioritize pain. But the interesting piece in that is the shaping in the neural pathways we've created through the sense of comfort. Yeah. What it can do to soften a man, right? Yeah. So I know particularly you have just raised the bar. 100-mile bike ride is nothing now compared to the triathlon, the 7-day fast now. But let's pour in, digressing a little bit, that this idea of becoming who and what God made us to be in our identity. And Wild at Heart particularly was a journey that I went on and shared with you, and I think you found it to be a very similar experience. But so kind of dovetailing on this, understanding one key point was on this beach, seeing your son, but some other key points have probably happened more recently, and the idea of discovery, right, of really the limits of what God is testing you perhaps to figure out, right, with where Dave can go. What are some more recent things that you learned, maybe Wild at Heart, about yourself and your identity and the poser, but then also this recent fast, right? 7 days, no water, no food, and you met the Lord in profound ways, I'm sure. So what kind of unpack both of those? There's a lot there, but what kind of comes to mind about that identity and sort of the pursuit of amazing?
Yeah. I think if we talk about identity, kind of stemming off the Wild at Heart retreat, and so as you mentioned, within the Wild at Heart retreat, so kind of a 4-day process, I called it counseling because I felt like I was just turned inside out from an emotional, soulful standpoint during that experience. One thing that's discussed, and it kind of progresses, is those areas of life where we are a poser. So kind of going off the idea of being a father that was all action, all words, no action. That was one way at that time, before Wild at Heart, that I addressed the area that I was a poser, and I corrected that. Some of those things turn into wounds, right, as discussed at Wild at Heart. So areas that you're a poser, why are you a poser? Well, for me, the wounds that we discuss and they get honored through the video series, and they ask you tons of questions, and you're kind of in that state of introspection.
Yep.
The two things that I heard, and again, being a child of a divorced family, was that you're not a priority and you're not enough. Because I was actually the youngest child of the family. My sister was almost off to college when my parents divorced, and so she was somewhat removed, but I felt like the full impact at like that 12-year-old boy age, and so hearing through that experience and really living with 12 to age 48 that you're not enough and you're not a priority. Those are two pretty deep wounds to have on the back of your mind. Did you take just sidebar? Did you take personal responsibility in some ways for what your parents went through? Oh, sure. Yeah.
And I don't mean that consciously. We do it probably more subconsciously. But through this experience, I'm guessing you had some healing with the Lord in revealing your true identity and your new name.
Yeah.
But as you're talking through that, and you're talking about you're not enough, and what is it?
Not a priority.
Not a priority.
Yeah.
That expresses that there was some hurt, and maybe that you were the cause. Right. So sorry to continue, but on that vein, it was like, oh, I get you there.
Yeah. I didn't know, as you mentioned, life experiences and difficulty can shape good things. And so I think that experience prioritized family for my wife and I. So there's a lot of good outcomes of it.
For that. Yep.
Yeah. Yeah. But, the exploration of potential and what I'm capable of, I started to just really trust the Lord. And I think that this past August, the way I voiced it to a friend is that at 48, before Wild, so just backing up just slightly before Wild at Heart, start to realize that I was speaking lies into my life, because again, that stool of mind, body, and soul, I achieved a lot that I did not think I was capable of any longer, for sure, from a physical standpoint. And then you start to achieve that. You start to set those goals. You start to achieve those goals and exceed where you thought you could be. You realize that you're capable. And the Lord spoke to me through that mentally and spiritually, I am more capable of than the way I'm living. And I needed to explore restoration in that area. I did not know that was from prior wounds at the time. I didn't address that, but I knew I was capable of more. So so just backing up to August, I went out to Washington, and on a friend's podcast, just through that experience, I was going to bookend the prior 48 years of my life. And I was going to start writing a new chapter going forward. How long that is going to be, probably not 48 years, maybe another.
Well, let's leave it there.
I'll go for another 48. I'm good at 96. I think I can do it.
That'd be a good one.
I think I can do it. Lord willing, if plan equips.
I'm with you there. I can join you.
So long chapters. But, joking aside, what I want to do that we go with our church, we do something through the baptism, and we get T-shirts and it says all things made anew, something to that effect. But it's the idea of baptism being a distinct time in your life where you can realize the sinner that you were, the choice that you made to follow God and to be made anew. And what do you do through that is you really provide a reference point or a mark of distinction to go back to that is not your old life. You are now carrying forward with the life of the Lord. So that symbolism really got me thinking about that. And I went out to Washington, and it was just a time to kind of get away from life and to get away from the stressors and to think about things a little bit more deeply in a time of reflection. And I said, you know what? I see what the Lord is offering me in life. I see what he's given me through the physical pursuits. I see where he's taken me with the mental pursuits. I see where through serving, he's grown me as a man through the spiritual pursuits. And I want to start putting that all together. And so I want that to be a new chapter. So that trip, that podcast was a line of distinction, a bookend on that. And since then, I wrote it down the other day. Things have really taken off. And I think that's just a mindset. So to your question, through the divorce, I think every child feels like that a little bit, that they were the cause, or that they were that they played a part in that. I think that as you progress, and actually one question you had that you asked me, just to kind of get a few points of reference before the podcast today, is when I came to faith and when I really started following the Lord with my heart. And I came to faith at 13 at a summer Bible camp. So, again, apart from life, just focusing on the Lord around other believers, very low stress, very low peer pressure. And it was really easy to follow. So that's why I made a decision to follow God. When I really started following God and pursuing him with my heart, I would say that I was probably around 44 to 45. And so I question how I would have even followed him to the extent that I do now, because as a father of 20-some-year-olds, as someone who's been married through 26, as someone who's been put through the fires of a corporate career, for better and for worse, I'm I'm continually a different human being than I was, and I can follow I can follow the Lord and serve Him at a deeper level because of those experiences.
For sure. Yeah. And I think what you're describing is some of the sentiment though, for going through the trials and the preparation for what's to come. It's like, I feel like it's the experiences that shape us. We're not always clear of the fruit or the benefit or how we're going to tap into that. Right. And sometimes going through the motions is there's a lot to be learned that we're missing, and we take it for granted. Right. But I think looking deeper into our identity and our new name and the lies we believed, you touched on just something massive. The lies that we believed, and you were starting to go there, and I might have cut you off, but the lies you believe that you were not enough, that you were, not important, affected you for all these years, and probably in some ways relationship with your dad and your mom in ways you probably didn't understand. And in fact, at 39 years old, not even about a year ago, I took up counseling with my mom because I thought we had this problem relationship, and turns out there were some things I just didn't feel loved because of how we interacted. And I realized after 5 sessions that there actually might have been some amazing things in my mom. I just failed to see it based on our own deficiencies. And there was areas of my dad that he got all the praise for, maybe he didn't deserve in some things. So I feel like the lies we believe and these examples of what it's the enemy's distortion of our views and that we're not enough from just that overarching, issue of not recognizing fully who we are in Christ. And so maybe that's the key here. The segue is unlocking, and I think what you described is this all things made new, the death, burial, resurrection of the old self to alive and new in this new creation. You set up a new sort of future. And for you, it sounds like a theme of what am I fully capable of? What am I chasing after? The things of this world don't matter to me, but there's also some things that I know I've traded off for good. And so I want to whittle away the bad, and I want to keep the good. And part of that transition to who the heck does a 7-day fast, right? And so what was the motivation behind that? And so part of like discovering yourself, Wild at Heart is really a process. Other dudes, the wilderness, right? It's you and me, God. Like, let's chart this thing out. Let's just start going through this. I love the restoration analogy, because before you can construct, you often have to deconstruct, right? And restoration comes from that process of preserving and identifying and parsing away old from the bad, right? And then restoring in the good. So for you, 48 years of these lies, what did you have to bury? What came out of the new name? What came out of your new identity? And then how did that lead to you deciding to take a 7-day fast to really push the limit? Because I still go, man, that just sounds way intimidating. And in fact, those are for the crazy Christians. No, I'm just kidding. Right. I do aspire to get there, but it comes down to the why, right? So for you, what was your why, and how did you get there?
Yeah. So with the 7-day fast, well, I'm gonna just speak to my wife a little bit. She's a nutritional therapy practitioner, and she's brought healing to our family. If there was kind of think the old tribal mentality, she is the healer of our family and of the community of friends that we're in. I think, like I said, through experiencing health, the consequences of health, the downside of poor health decisions impacted her at an early age. Okay. And then I think becoming a mother, we had just 2 sons that were starting to become, victims of a toxic environment that we live in, whether it be the cleaners, the foods we consume, the shortcuts that corporations make to be profitable at the expense of their consumers' health. And I don't need to go too deep into that, just to say I think we all know that exists. And our sons were starting to become victim to that. And so to be protector, I think that role of healer kind of unearthed itself in my wife. And so before I jump into a 7-day fast, I want to give her all of the credit. That's the role that she plays in our family. That's the role and the name that God would give her. And I'm eternally grateful for her pursuing that path, because we're a family of health, and we've overcome so much from a health standpoint because of her passion and because of what God laid on her heart, that I can't not start with that.
Yeah. Wow.
So how and why would I pursue a 7-day fast? I just want to say she's in my corner. I'm not a doctor. I'm not recommending this course of action for other people, but it is towards restoration. And so we came across a book called The Phoenix Protocol, and it outlines this 7-day dry fast. And so not a water fast. I had done water fast before, and so had my wife. And it actually, water fasts are great from the standpoint that it puts the right context of food and relationship with food. It brings that back into our lives. What could we do without? Why do we eat? Are we eating because we're bored, or are we eating because we're hungry? Do we need 3 meals a week? It gets you to kind of think.
3 meals a week.
Back.
That would sound pretty nice after 7 days.
Yeah.
3 meals a week.
Yeah. Speaking of wild at heart, I ate more on that men's retreat than I have like over a 4-day period, I think probably for the last 5 years. But that's another story. But no, it's reaching a point where you're really seeking restoration. And so this book spoke of restoration. We spoke a little bit of, why does anyone fast? Well, there's a lot of mental clarity. There's a lot of cellular health and benefits and restoration. And so it's pursuing those things. So the 7-day fast, dry fast, instead of a water fast, which I had done those before, is no food and no water. And I actually looked up, because the biggest thing that I probably heard from people's thoughts was, I thought you could not survive more than 3 days without water. And I heard that so much, and I had heard that, and obviously know that for at least me, that's not true.
You're here. Yeah.
Yeah, I can go 7. But I looked that up, and it's interesting. I looked that up yesterday because so many people have brought it up. I'm like, where did that come from?
Yeah.
Because so many times you do a little research, right? And it's no exception here.
Who started that lie?
So in 1944, 2 scientists did a study. One went without food and water for 4 days. One went without food and water for 3 days.
Oh, it must have been the limit that killed him.
No, they actually stopped before they had any negative health consequences. But the kind of overall sentiment was that given studied at room temperature, you could make it about 3 days. And they actually couldn't even find the name of the 2 scientists in 1944 that conducted the study. So that's where that saying comes from. If anyone knows that not to be true, or they know the names, or they know a deeper study, let me know. But then you start digging into it, and it's like, oh yeah, there's been larger studies. You can certainly make it longer, given age, health, et cetera, et cetera. So
was there a risk, by the way, in doing the 7 days that you saw to be potentially real threats?
Well, I think anytime you change, talk about people when they stop drinking or stop smoking or make a change to what's intake into their body, that's, again, why not a doctor, consult a physician if you'd like. I didn't. I live with someone I trust from a health standpoint. But there was markers that we could monitor. We monitored heart rate. I was doing test strips to measure my ketones, my uric acid levels, my pH levels, to make sure that my body was in a good state. There's other indicators. I won't go into like any bathroom stuff. If my wife is here, she's like she goes into gut health and bathroom stuff all the time. So I'll save that for her potential episode down the road. But no, it was an exploration to restore. I think bigger picture, why explore capability and why go into it from whether it be mental, spiritual, physical, is and out of the retreat is that I really realized at this stage in life, and we talked about before we got going on the podcast, Josh, the importance of living a life that looks the same regardless of whatever environment you're in. Mm-hmm. And the life that I'm living, thanks to God, is realizing that through serving Him, I've discovered what He has for me in life and not what He wants from me. Mm-hmm. And I've also realized through the Men's Coffee group, I'll just back up really quick story with Men's Coffee. We set up on Tuesday mornings. I set up tables and chairs. And then what we'll do is we'll go through questions that relate to the message from the prior Sunday. And so it's a way to go a little bit deeper to get guys talking about the subject that was discussed on Sunday. And if you go back a couple of years ago, there was a message on Sunday that our pastor delivered. And as he's giving the message, I'm like scribbling down notes to kind of facilitate questions that revolve around men, of how the masculine perspective of the message on Sunday kind of slant the questions as a husband, a father,
Right.
a member of your community from a masculine perspective. So I'm always jotting down notes. And there was one particular Sunday that the message was delivered. And I was so excited, as I almost ran out of ink. And I was so excited for that Tuesday morning where I would sit down and I would set up men's coffee and I would make these questions and I would facilitate this great conversation. And you'll notice a word that I use in there, I, 4 times at least.
I was waiting for you to call that out. Okay, I'm glad you did.
And that Tuesday morning, we usually have about 15 to 20 guys. So I'm like, it's 3 tables of guys just discussing this, diving into this message. We had 4 other men show up that Tuesday morning. It was the lowest attendance ever at a men's coffee. And my initial feeling was rejection. Or I was dejected from, I had these great questions, and how could, why didn't guys show up? And it was all about me and how I was going to facilitate. And I tell you what, backing up to that moment on the beach, again, hit like a ton of bricks. The Lord said, this is not about you, Dave. You are a facilitator in this scenario. You will brew the coffee. You will put up the tables and chairs, and you are creating a space for me, the Lord, to come into and work on these men's hearts. Mm-hmm. And I was in tears. And since then, I've learned 2 things. One, that's certainly true. The Lord is asking us as servants we serve him, we serve other people,
and then get out of the way.
And then we create we create the space. And one name that came from the Wild at Heart retreat was facilitator. That I would facilitate these places of community, these places that get set up. I would get out of the way, and the Lord comes in and the Lord works, because he's certainly more powerful. He's more on the money. He is in our hearts, and he works on our hearts. And the other thing that came from that really is just trusting the Lord, allowing him to guide me, taking myself out of the equation. And what that did was it freed me up. It freed up that kind of that man-made expectation of, how am I measuring myself as a leader? Oh, well, how many guys showed up on a Tuesday morning? I'm running the numbers. And going back to what I said, in all environments, if I'm being myself, that taught me about the corporate space too. Because I think a little bit about the corporate space was the feedback that I was receiving as a leader from those that I led on my teams or my peers, or the annual reviews, and how was that delivered. That I was then measuring myself by those. And while there's certainly indicators and you want to grow and you want to grow professionally, that was defining me. It was not what the Lord would have for me. Well, it turns out that when you serve others, you can take that into a corporate space. And that was that was almost simultaneous, that I was very dissatisfied with where my career was going. And I was not satisfied that Tuesday at Men's Coffee when the Lord really spoke to me and said, you are a facilitator. And part of that facilitating, I promise I'll arc this back to capability shortly, is speaking value into others. And so in a corporate setting, that was the Lord saying, you can make this space. What would you like in a corporate space? You would like someone to speak value into you, Dave. You would like someone to be an advocate. I mean, I work for a Fortune 5 company. I mean, we're the largest of large. And one thing that tends to get removed from that scenario is any assignment of adequate value. I oversee a financial profit and loss statement of over $12 billion. If it was just me doing that, I would be like on the cover of Fortune magazine. They'd be like, Dave Barton, overseeing a $12 billion
like we should be on our knees right
business.
now.
Yeah, how do you do it? You're so great, and it'd be that value. But joking aside, like that's what a corporate culture can do. It can be all consuming. You start to define yourself by the measurements that they provide you. You get lost, you get devalued, and you really feel like you have no one advocating for you. So I think and that doesn't have to be a large corporation. That can be anybody you work for. You can start going by those mile markers. And what you start to do is you start to separate the two. You start to separate yourself as the individual, how you are at home, how you are at your family,
totally
in community settings and social settings, and then how you are at work. Those
your identity.
Those two become distinct. Well, what the Lord would have for me through the Men's Coffee experience is that what I would like to see, the Lord can bring that in, but he needs someone to facilitate that. And since then, as a people leader, as someone that's trusted by my peers and my team, my career has really taken off from not the miserables of monetary or title or review, but from peers saying, Dave, we love working with you. We love being on your team. We feel that you see us. Thank you for the value that you're assigning us. Thank you for the professional development. Thank you for that one-off discussion that I just felt like I couldn't have anybody else in this space. And really going back to and the capability would be very next. That morning, it was, I can be a facilitator, and the Lord will work if you will set up that community wherever you're at. There should be no distinction upon the person that you are or you portray in your social setting, in your professional setting, in your families. If that person is the same across all of those, you're not only doing yourself a favor, you're doing your community, you're doing your workplace a favor, because they know what they're getting. If that doesn't work out from a professional setting, then maybe it's time to find a new setting. But with capability, how that kind of piggybacks on top of that is when you serve others and when you find out what the Lord has for you in life, you really want to serve them to the fullest. You want to serve a situation to the fullest. So like our bike ride is a great example. Many men come into that, and 100 miles is overwhelming. Like, how am I going to get to this in a few months of training riding a bike? And then they see themselves doing that, and they see themselves become more capable. Well, that's for them, and that builds them up, and that can lead to other great things, and that can lead to fellowship and community for them as an individual. But it also serves this bigger mission, because they said, I will become more capable. And when they've done that, they've served others. They've served children in Thailand and Burma, and they've served local charities and communities of people, and they've served their families. Because on that day, I tell you, the most favorite thing about the bike ride is the finish line of the dads who have done it, and their kids, the way they look at them as like, I heard a wife say one time, their children think that they hang the moon at night. And you see that, you reflect it in that moment as the dad crosses the finish line of 100+ miles biking. And you also see a dynamic. You see the wife look longingly at this husband who's slimmed down, who's achieved something great, who's taken on a mission bigger than himself. And so it's that point of being a facilitator and serving, but that's not where it stops. Like, you have to become more capable. If you're not becoming capable, then you're really cheating the mission. You're cheating the gifts that God has given to you. So when you say, would you take on a 7-day fast? Why would you run a marathon? Why would you do a 100-mile bike ride? Why would you do a triathlon? There is a component that it does make you feel good. It builds you up. Yes, I mean, no doubt. And there is a component that it's nice the way that your friends look at you, and the way that your wife looks at you, maybe more longingly because you're taking your health more seriously. Certainly. But bar none, I would not do any of that. As you mentioned, I would be at home on my couch living a comfortable life if I did not have the drive from the Lord. And he said, just like that day in the hospital when I held my first son, when I was giving him his bath, you are a father now. He said, now you are a facilitator. And the word that came from the Wild at Heart mission, because as you mentioned, kind of the ceremony is to go through what areas of life are we a poser. Right. So I identified those. Why was I a poser? Because of the wounds. I was not enough. I was not a priority. And then beyond that, you write on a piece of white paper the name that the Lord would have for you. And this is not boisterous. The name that came automatically through that progression was King. And so King, I've joked with a few others. It's like, yeah, Dave, great. You're a king. Good for you. That sounds kind of boisterous, but here's why it's not. Because it's a king in the image of the King of Kings. And from that Wild at Heart retreat and taking that time of reflection and stepping aside from life and stepping aside from the titles that the world would give me falsely through hurts and wounds and bad experiences, the Lord said, you are an image bearer of me. You are an image bearer of the King of Kings, Lord of Lords. You are a king, Dave. But again, it doesn't stop there. It doesn't stop when you say, I realize I need to serve others. It doesn't stop when the Lord says, you are a father. It stopped for me, right? Like, because he laid that on my heart. You will be a father. And I did take that seriously. And I did what I thought was my best. And then it hits you like a ton of bricks that you're all words and no action. I stopped growing. Well, the best thing that we can do from lessons in life is learn from them and move on and progress and increase in capability, increase in taking that to heart and living that through. And so that's why since 2018, it's been a progression. And that's why a 7-day fast. I mean, I could talk about the intricacies. I could talk how it literally feel like you're carving yourself out from the inside and dropping to your knees in your mind to really fight through that and not intaking anything from a food and water standpoint. But the point of it is that you're serving others. And if you take that seriously, you have to become more capable. It's in the workplace. So the Stewardpreneur podcast. And so how does that apply? I could progress more. I could progress faster in my career. I could have up to this point if I would have taken my family for granted. If I would have set them to the side and said, but really to serve the family, I need to supply from a monetary standpoint for you, honey. And so I'm going to take this and I'm not going to be at every sporting event. I'm going to leave my kids in doubt of whether I care for what they have going on in their lives. But I never did that. And maybe I did to the extreme. But the point is in a corporate setting now, I'm the same person as when I go home.
Yeah.
I'm the same person at home that I am in a corporate setting. And by doing that, I've freed myself up. I serve a purpose. Whatever purpose that plays out, I think it is starting to attract me around the right people.
Yeah.
And we've talked about, just relationship building and people call it networking. Well, I would just go beyond that. There's so much more to networking than knowing someone who knows someone that wants to set you up to make themselves look good. I think that when you really start being relational and getting to know people and caring about people and serving them, that you actually build up something called capital. And the relationships that I want in my life right now, work, professional, personal, serving, are ones that are built on capital. I want them built on action.
Yeah. So there's a lot there in this word of king, and the best kings are really the ones that serve the people, right?
That's right.
And think about, I just have this picture of the relentless pursuit of protection for your family. Often, and you've seen the films, whether it's Braveheart or Gladiator, and these world famous movies where they paint the picture of the king on the battlefield, not above, right, but leading it, and because the man is there with I'm putting everything on the line to protect the most, and if I don't have this, I have nothing, right, and so. Unfortunately, technology has protected us, and civilization has changed in a way that has allowed us to not have to worry maybe in the same way about kingdoms being destroyed and coming and going. Now, we still have to worry about wars for the same purpose, but that I would be willing to do whatever it takes, right, for my family shows your priority. But that servant heart, there's along the way, if we don't keep that in check, it becomes about us. And we even learned in this most recent sermon at church how Nehemiah, so far removed and okay with the vision that was going to happen, as long as it wasn't in his time, right? And it's okay. And I think for me, it's the smallest of smallest things that are right in front of us that we're, if we're able to learn and humble ourselves, we are going to go farther than we can ever imagine. So particularly one thing that I'm learning is, as a dad and as a husband, I'm the problem solver. I'm the entrepreneur who has the ideas and not afraid to share and not afraid to ask the hard questions and challenge and motivate. But what I realized in that is that I'm stifling the person's need to be able to just simply say, I hear what you're saying. Oh, that must be rough. I can appreciate why it might be rough and reflect on their words and how they're feeling. They just want to be heard, not have solutions thrown at them, right? And sometimes that distinction at 40 years old is a new learning that I'm making, because my whole life I was never stopped and corrected and taught that maybe you should just reflect back what you said to someone, because they just want to be heard and understood and be acknowledged in that way. And nurture nature, whatever it was in the midst of my upbringing, we miss these small little things that shape us and make us until we just stop for a second and are humbled, and through God's word and through these special experiences that we're able to dig deep and figure out the why. And sometimes the why opens up this whole new perspective that we're going to relentlessly chase after, right? And I feel like if we don't put ourselves out there to try to be uncomfortable, we're going to continue to be comfortable. And when we're not pushed to discover who we are when we break, that we're going to allow ourselves to just continue to be whatever that area is, to be ran over, right? To be pushed aside, to allow it to happen, to be passive. And it all comes back to, again, where those posing lies we started to believe that who I am here in this light is different than this light. I feel like that particular example, we're almost taught in a way to be this person and not vulnerable and not real on camera when it matters, that I need to show myself this certain way. We're taught that. We're not taught to be vulnerable. Yeah. We're not taught to reflect your words back to you, and rather we're taught to say what you need to say. And you better shut up and put up in some ways. And some of these it's like, oh, we don't talk about, faith, politics, and religion at family events. Why? Because we can't figure out how to get along by holding our tongue and just say, oh, so you feel that way about so-and-so. Instead, we have to insert our opinions, right? Yeah. And so all this rhetoric and this voice and the movements that have changed and social media has amplified all of it. All this stuff, man, you're saying is truth. And I think it's even at 48, there's hope, and even at 40 and even at whatever age you're at, right? I say this to anyone, that what God has for you is far greater, and we get stuck on the uncomfortable. But that's where we grow, right? That's where we're stretched. So, man, what a privilege today as I just sit here and hear some of your perspectives and the trade-offs of what you did for your family, maybe the areas you didn't do for yourself, or the areas that you were taught through others that you're now able to apply elsewhere. But it comes back to the why. If we're doing what we're allowed to be a vessel and point to the one who created us, that this is far bigger than us. It's not us. That the next generation and the next generation, and however many there are, the servant heart, and putting that reminder back into us, that it creates the most joy, it creates the most fulfillment, it creates the most reward, because we fail to realize that what he has for us is just massively bigger than, and we sometimes just say, well, then I'm going to have to stop doing this and I'm going to give up that. But that person that's the same in all these circumstances, well, he may be undersuited for this or that, but he knows in his identity where he's failing. That guy's going to wear it proudly, and it's going to show through because he's willing to do whatever it takes to be humbled and go through that. Yeah. So he can point to the true reason he's created, and that identity of being a child bearer and an image bearer of God and the one Most High who created us. It's how, you can't create that perspective just by talking at someone, right? It's meeting them where they are. And so what you're doing in Men's Coffee and how you see men as a way to serve and get out of the way, that's what it's about, man.
Can I ask you a cool question?
You do it.
So, with the podcast, I always ask so many questions. I don't think I've asked you any questions, but I want to wrap up what we're saying with a very important point. And so you may speak to someone who's not following the Lord, and I know I've been witnessing to many that fall into that category lately, but I've also spoken to them with things that matter, family issues. Because you said something, that as a king, it used to mean like a kingdom was at stake, right? And I would correct, I would not correct you, but I would preface that with saying I absolutely believe the stakes are eternal, and the stakes are eternal in the consequence of a marriage, like we've talked about, how the wounds that can lay. The stakes of being the parent that our children deserve, the stakes of being the man in our communities that we deserve, Josh. And so let me ask you this. Let me just ask you a scenario. Do you go anywhere without Google Map nowadays. And maybe maybe you've been to a meeting sometimes before and you know the route, but even to like be there on time for the meeting, there might be traffic that day. There might be road construction. You read. So do you go anywhere without Google Map?
It's impossible. It's natural, right? You have to navigate your way.
Right. Because why? Because maybe you have a meeting, and why? Like the meeting.
I want to know the route to take. It's going to take the amount of time that I need. I need to be there on time, right, and prepared. So I'm there, to do what I'm supposed to be doing.
Right. You place some importance on it, right?
Importance. Yeah.
And at the end of the day, I mean, might be an important meeting, it might not, but we value that interaction with another human being. Mm-hmm. But what I'm going to challenge everybody that hears this is the path of intentionality is so important. That's an intentional path. Like you want to be on time, you want to know the route to take, you want to know how to get there, and you honor that meeting with somebody. Well, going back to a king, our obligation is as father, is as husband, is to lead our families, is to lead in our communities, is to be a strong voice, to be ready to talk about our faith, about politics, about finances, about things like that. We need to step up our game, and that takes intentionality and that takes capability. Again, that three-legged stool. Mind, body, and soul. You strengthen one. Just start pursuing any of those guys. Mm-hmm. Anyone that's listening to this, pursue one of those things. And I promise you, if you pursue it with your heart and your mind and your soul, it will bleed into the others. Mm-hmm. But the intentionality part is, if you're married, your marriage, are you using Google Map? Do you know the path? Or are you just winging it? Maybe you end up with a happy marriage. Maybe you don't. That's one thing from the Wild at Heart retreat that really broke down was, I had these wounds that I was not letting my wife in on because I did not even realize them. I did not seek a path of healing. I did not seek counseling. I did not seek repair. I was trying to move forward to the best version of me and hopeful that my marriage would land there.
Yeah. Yep.
And I was not giving the best of myself, and I was not making every effort in that relationship. Yeah. And so I did not map out that course, proverbially or with, through the analogy with Google.
That's the analogy.
But it matters. Yeah. It's what I'm called to do. And as a father, same thing. I had gone through all these experiences, but what I would, just to wrap it, like from my perspective of seeking capability, all those things I pursued, that really started in earnest in 2018. So wherever you feel I'm at now, what I really want to get out there is just start with something. Just start moving forward, but embrace it with the fact that you're ready to receive. Matt Eklund, who's been on your show, shared that with me. When he made a change, and so many people, is when they're in a state to receive. Because how many friends do you want to help, and you just try to help them, and they can't. You hear it, they can't help themselves. Well, they're not in a place to receive. So if you hear anything, hear a man who was hit with a ton of bricks, that he was all words and no action as a dad. I was overweight. I was on the craft beer train of thinking that was the greatest thing ever. I was inactive. I was a couch dad, the fantasy football dad, the NFL addicted dad. And I have lived a 180-degree different life I live today than that day on that beach in 2018. And I would not trade it for the world, the experience, the reflection. I've given myself grace. I've repaired. I've restored. But it doesn't take that long. That was 6 years ago.
Well, and it's one step, one starting point, right? One change, one different decision. And the nonprofit that we started, that the hope was that, and I think back and I look back at so many different circumstances, that it literally takes that first step. And so just one step, right. It was all it took to make a phone call, to start counseling, to understand how this thing called anger for me wasn't the byproduct of just being someone who wasn't happy in life. There was deeper rooted issues there. And so the symptom of the problem came out of the way I would be frustrated and irritable and short with my family. But that led to so far much that it would put my family at risk. And so had I not taken one step towards the right direction, I might have taken one step too far. And so as much as it is to go one step too far, where there's a catastrophic failure, we can stop, right, and take one step in the right direction, in the new direction, to becoming the person that God made you to be, right? And I think that's the powerful key here. It's like we're so sometimes bent in shame, looking back in what we shoulda, woulda, coulda done. And the difference is that's gone. Those days are over. Those may have influenced who you are, but it doesn't define you, right? And so there's always, as long as there's lung in your breath, in your lungs, there's air in your lungs, we have today. And we can start today. And I always say this too. It's like, is it too late? It's never too late for how God can restore. And that's actually why he came here to seek and save the lost,
right,
to create a redemptive, restorative new world in him. Right. And so when I think about the message here and the movements that are happening where men are being called to step up and become those leaders, it's to lead. And Matt actually said the same thing, is like, how am I willing to even do and expect my wife and my kids to do whatever I ask if I'm not able to do it myself and go first, to do the hard thing that's looking right here. And the truth is, that's what we have to go through. And each day, the thing that's hurting us the most is the thing we need to lean into. That's where we start. It's like, if the sin today is the sin of X, Y, and Z, how is it affecting your quality of life, right? And the intentionality that you hope to have versus the reality of who you've been living as. And when you find that bridge, there's a discrepancy there. It's time to take action, right? And so, and I think part of just underlying below all this is as I got to know you, Dave, just your heart has resounding just sentiment towards this message that you are a different person. And it's not because Dave is simply awoke one day as a different person. It's because you've taken mild and hard and tough steps into the direction that you're feeling called to, right? And that calling comes from our Creator. It comes from truth, right? And so here's the thing. You talked about the journey, and I love this full circle, and we'll close it up, is that when I think about the journey is what we're actually to enjoy, because the destination means we've gotten there.
Yeah.
But even when you get to the vacation, the journey is just beginning when you get to the vacation. Yeah. So if we can't stop and appreciate the journey, before we know it, it's all gone, and then everything we have is for naught. So today, the journey, the joy in which we find comes from what we put our hope in. So thanks for sharing, man.
Yeah.
Such a great pleasure.
Thanks again.
Oh man, when I get a chance to go to town with a guy on the microphone, you match well. You showed up.
Thank you.
Well, thanks so much for joining me in another episode of the Successfully Unsuccessful podcast. Dave Barton, and we'll see you next time.